I'm Sean Esterly with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and welcome to today's webinar, which is hosted by the Clean Energy Solutions Center in partnership with the World Resources Institute. Today's webinar is focused on the mini-grids for energy access in sub-Saharan Africa, status and lessons learned from Tanzania. And one important note of mention before we begin our presentations is that the Clean Energy Solutions Center does not endorse or recommend specific products or services. Information provided in this webinar is featured in the Solutions Center's resource library as one of many best practices resources reviewed and selected by technical experts. And I just want to go over some of the webinar features for you. You have two options for audio. You may either listen through your computer or over your telephone. If you choose to listen through your computer, please select the mic and speakers option in the audio pane to help eliminate feedback and echo. If you choose to dial in by phone, go ahead and select the telephone option, and a box on the right side will display the telephone number and the audio pin that you can use to dial in. If anyone's having technical difficulties with the webinar, you may contact the GoToWebinars Help Desk at 888-259-3826. And if you'd like to ask a question during the webinar, and we encourage everyone in the audience to do so if you have any, please go ahead and type that in the question pane and submit it there, and then we'll present those to the panelists during the question and answer session. If you're having difficulty viewing the materials through the webinar portal, we'll be posting PDF copies of the presentations at cleanenergysolutions.org/training. And also an audio recording of today's presentations will be posted to the Solutions Center training page within about a week of today's broadcast. Just a reminder, we will also be adding the recordings to the Solutions Center YouTube channel, where you will find other informative webinars as well as video interviews with thought leaders on clean energy policy topics. And we have a great agenda set for you today. It's centered around the presentations from our guest panelists, Asome Sawe, Meneno Katiaga, and Lily Ardano. These panelists have been kind enough to join us to provide an overview of the recent World Resources Institute and TaTEDO study exploring the status of mini-grids in Tanzania. Before speakers begin their presentations, I'll just give a quick overview of the Clean Energy Solutions Center initiative, and then following the presentations is when we'll have the question and answer session where panelists will address those questions submitted by the audience. And then we'll have some quick closing remarks and a brief survey for attendees today. So this slide provides a bit of background in terms of how the Solutions Center came to be formed. Solutions Center is one of 13 initiatives of the Clean Energy Ministerial that was launched in April of 2011 and is primarily led by Australia, the United States, and other CEM partners. Some outcomes of this unique initiative include support of developing countries and emerging economies through enhancement of resources and policies relating to energy access, no-cost expert policy assistance, and peer-to-peer learning and training tools such as the webinar you are attending today. And there's 4 primary goals for the Solutions Center. First goal is to serve as a clearinghouse of clean energy policy resources. Second is to share policy best practices, data, and analysis tools specific to clean energy policies and programs. The third goal is to deliver dynamic services that enable expert assistance, learning, and peer-to-peer sharing of experiences. And then lastly, the Center fosters dialogue on emerging policy issues and innovation from around the globe. And the primary audience is typically energy policymakers and analysts from governments and technical organizations in all countries, but we also strive to engage with the private sector, NGOs, and also civil society. So one of the marquee features that the Solutions Center provides is the no-cost expert policy assistance known as Ask an Expert. And the Ask an Expert program has established a broad team of over 30 experts from around the globe who are each available to provide remote policy advice and analysis to all countries at no cost to you. So for example, in the clean energy topic of rural electrification, we're very pleased to have Ibrahim Rehman, a director of the Social Transformation Division at the Energy Resources Institute, who serves as one of our experts in that area. So if you have a need for policy assistance in rural electrification or any other clean energy sector, we do encourage you to use this valuable service. And again, the assistance is provided to you free of charge. So if you have a question for our experts, please submit it through our simple online form at cleanenergysolutions.org/expert. And we also encourage you to share the word about this service to those in your networks and also your organizations. So now I'd like to go ahead and provide some brief introductions for today's distinguished panelists. The first speaker that we'll be hearing from is Lily Ardano. Lily is an associate with the World Resources Institute's Energy Program, and she leads WRI's energy access work in East Africa. Following Lily is going to be Asome Sawe, the Executive Director of TaTEDO, a Center for Sustainable Energy Services in Tanzania. And he has over 25 years experience in rural renewable energy, including mini-grid programs, development, combined with experience working with the government of Tanzania Energy Department for more than 15 years, heading the renewable energy section. And then our third and final speaker today is Menino Katiaga, who is currently Senior Advisor to TaTEDO on renewable energy mini-grids development projects and electrification. Formerly, he was a Deputy Managing Director at Tanzania Electric Supply Company, where he was responsible for research, strategic planning, and management of all major projects at TANESCO. And so with those introductions, I'd now like to welcome Lily to the webinar.
Thanks, Sean. So thank you, Sean, and thanks to the audience for joining us this morning for this webinar. So this is work that the World Resources Institute and the Tanzania Traditional Energy Development Organization has been involved with over the last 6 months, and we are happy to present the findings of our study today. So just, I'll begin with just a brief overview of the study that we have conducted. So generally there's this growing interest in decentralized solutions for energy access on international levels, such as the Sustainable Energy for All. Mini-grids are being identified as high-impact opportunities. National governments are establishing targets for closing energy access gaps with mini-grids. And there's this growing interest in the role of mini-grids in closing energy access gaps. The IEA projects that in sub-Saharan Africa, almost half of the rural population is going to gain access to mini-grids by 2040. And up to 100,000 and 200,000 mini-grids will have to be built to meet this need. In spite of this interest, we realize that there's very little documentation and very little experience with mini-grids in sub-Saharan Africa generally. Unlike we have in Southeast Asia, where there's been a lot of experience with mini-grids, there's very little experience with the sector in sub-Saharan Africa. So we were interested in sort of building the knowledge base on mini-grids and realized that most of the information actually available out there is very broad, focuses on very general information about mini-grids, focuses on the general financing challenges, the general issues with the developing scalable business models and all of that. So we decided to focus on a more sort of granular approach to understanding mini-grids, understanding what the opportunities and challenges with their implementation is, and understanding from a very specific country level perspective what the actual play on the ground is and what we can learn from mini-grid implementation in a typical sub-Saharan African context. Now, Tanzania has been lauded for successes with creating attractive policy environments for mini-grids to proliferate, but we also realize that even in that context, there's very little information out there about how mini-grids were faring in practice. So it was necessary to take stock of progress, to understand what has worked and what has not worked, to understand what the exact current status of mini-grids in Tanzania is. And we also hope that this granular approach to understanding mini-grids, their opportunities and challenges, can be scaled across other regions as well beyond Tanzania. So we work with the World Resources Institute, work closely with the Tanzania Traditional Energy Development Organization to conduct this piece of research. And the aim was to sort of work locally with a partner who is grounded in the realities of the local context to identify research which was relevant and also to identify opportunities for impact. And so our work focused on 4 key areas that we identified as relevant for understanding the status of mini-grids in Tanzania. First of all, our work focused on the challenges and opportunities with developing and operating mini-grids. So just looking into fundamental issues of how decisions to go mini-grids rather than general grid electrification is done, understanding the financing challenges that project level implementers of mini-grids face, understanding just some of the very practical issues with billing and tariffs that apply to mini-grid implementation. We also looked at different mini-grid technologies, looking at the factors that influence which technologies are chosen over others and understanding how that plays in the Tanzanian context. Then, of course, looking at the policy and regulatory frameworks in Tanzania, looking at how these have influenced project-level experiences with rolling out mini-grids in Tanzania. And then finally, we also examined what's becoming an important issue, that's the link between mini-grids and development, understanding how the coupling of mini-grids efforts with development activities can help develop sustainable mini-grid markets over the long term. So this is an overview of the work that we have done over the last couple of months, and with that I'm going to hand over to my colleagues in TaTEDO. I'm going to hand over to Estome to take us into the current state of play of mini-grids in Tanzania.
Thank you, Lily, for the introduction. Sorry, we are having a small problem here. Okay. Okay, thank you, Lily, for the introduction on the presentation. Now I'll discuss and I'll be presenting the mini-grids in Tanzania, the current status as the electrification target of Tanzania by the year 2035 is access rate of 75%. Currently, the country has a population of about 49.4 million, of whom 25% are living in urban areas and 75% are in rural areas. The current access rate is about 24%, of whom 43% are those with access are living in urban areas and 6% are in rural areas. As we can see from the Tanzanian map, which is in front of us, most of the grid, which is shown by black lines and red lines, is on the northeastern part of the country and a little bit to the south, but most of the southern part of the country and the western part of the country has no grid. And you can see the green lines as sub-transmissions, and also the dotted black points, the mini-grids, as they are distributed in some parts of the country. So the access rate, 24%, is really from the grid and also from some of the mini-grids which are shown on the map. Per capita gross domestic product as of 2014 was $1,047, and the electricity consumption per capita is around 100 kilowatt hours. So the history of mini-grids in Tanzania, electrification in Tanzania started way back in 1908 during the colonial days, when the first mini-grids were developed in railway workshops located in Dar es Salaam, Tabora, and Kigoma townships. And these mini-grids were used to provide services at the railway station, but also extended a few networks to the local people who were located near the railway stations. Early mini-grids were usually developed to power mining, to provide to support agro-based industries, but also some of them were developed also by the faith-based organizations to provide social services, to provide social services in some parts of the country. After independence, the government of Tanzania still continued to develop diesel-based mini-grids for electrification of different isolated townships for industrialization in the country. So before the year 2008, the Tanzania government used to provide regulatory services, but mini-grid development regulatory services. By the year 2008, the government came up with the Electricity Act, which provided, tried to promote light-handed approach to regulating small renewable energy projects for small project developers, which were necessary to ensure that they are regulated, and also using the Energy and Water Utilities Regulatory Authority came up with standardized power purchase agreement for main grid and for mini grids. Small power producers who wanted to sell electricity either as a wholesale or retail to the distribution network operators, the DNOs. So by June 2008, also the regulator provided standardized tariff methodology for mini grids, also for both main grid and also for mini grids owned by the DNO. So with that one, the first generation mini grids or standardized power purchase tariffs were prepared. They were technology neutral, and also they were also for the main grid and also for the mini grids, and they were indeed catering for avoiding costs of the DNOs, and adjusted during the dry season. They were a little bit higher due to the avoided cost of the DNO, but also during the wet season they were lower tariffs. And the technology neutral feed-in tariffs were more cost reflective for the hydros and biomass, but were not really very cost reflective for solar and wind. So they are not very supportive for the development of solar and wind-based mini grids. Because of that one, the regulatory and the government came up with a second generation of feed-in tariff, which were more technology specific and cost reflective, and also system size dependent. They were also pegged to dollar. We can see the hydro tariffs. They are shown there. They were size dependent, and also the biomass based mini grids also pegged in dollar. But the solar and wind tariffs were left to be determined through competitive biddings based on project by project. So the current mini grid status or the current status in the country. What we found out during our study was by early 2016, Tanzania mainland had up to 109 existing mini-grids in 21 regions with a total installed capacity of 157.7 megawatts, connecting about 183,785 customers. Out of these mini-grids, 16 mini-grids were connected to the grid, and 93 of those were isolated mini-grids. So trends in the development of mini-grids after 2008 small power producers regulations. As we can see, the red bars indicates total number of mini-grids which are in the country, and the blue ones are mini-grids before 2008 regulatory framework. As can be seen, hybrid systems were developed after 2008 regulatory framework. Solar PV 13 mini-grids have been developed, were developed for biomass or biofuel based. There are 25 mini-grids in the country. 5 of them were developed before 2008 regulatory framework. So 20 mini-grids have been developed after the regulatory framework of 2008. For the hydro, we have a total of 49 mini-grids. 40 of them were developed before the 2008 SPP regulatory framework. So 9 of them have been developed after the 2008 SPP regulatory framework. For the diesel-based mini-grids, we have a total of 19 mini-grids. 12 of them were developed before the 2008 regulatory framework, and 7 of them have been developed after the 2008 regulatory framework. Although this, the diesel and natural gas mini-grids, as we will see front, first, they are not renewable. They also don't benefit from the SPPA framework because they are owned by the DNO. So mini-grids which have signed standardized power purchase agreements since 2008, as we can see, 15 mini-grids projects with a total capacity of 53.5 megawatts have signed standardized power purchase agreement. And the number includes the ones which have been commissioned as well as those are yet to be commissioned. So we can see from the presentation that most of them they are hydro-based. 74% of the mini-grids developers have they are hydro-based. They have signed the SPPA. 18% are biomass-based, and 8% are solar-based. So mini-grids that under planning with letter of intent, as you can see, a total of 16 mini-grids are under planning with a total capacity of 67.2 megawatts, and out of these 33.2 megawatts, they are hydro-based, 10 megawatts are biomass-based, 24 megawatts are solar PV-based mini-grids. None of them we found out for the wind and hybrid. So mini-grid ownership trends in Tanzania. There are 4 types of ownership or four types of operators of mini-grids in Tanzania. There are community-based mini-grid owners or operators, also private mini-grid operators, utility mini-grid operators, and also charity mini-grid operators. And as we can see, the hydro-based mini-grids, about 60% of them are owned, they are under charity, owned by faith-based organizations, and the remaining 40% are distributed, as we can see, about a little bit more than 10% are owned by community, and we have utility-owned mini-grids, around 10%, and also private-owned mini-grids. There are also a few of them. When it comes to biomass-based mini-grids, most of them are privately owned, and a few are community-owned mini-grids. But also, when it comes to solar, we have what we found out most of them are community-owned. Most of them, more than 80%, are owned by community. And we have few privately owned mini-grids. When it comes to natural diesel and natural gas-based mini-grids, all of them are owned by the utility, the DNO. But also the hybrid-based mini-grids are owned by private operators. The current metering and payment approaches, as we can see, we have three types of metering or payment arrangements. We have the blue one, the blue bars. We have prepayment metering arrangement, and then the red bars indicate the credit metering arrangement, and we have the last one, the load limiters, which is green color. So we can see from the bottom the hydro-based mini-grids, the 34 of them, they have a credit metering arrangement, and 15 of them, they have prepayment arrangements. The biomass-based mini-grids, 21 of them, they have credit-based mini-grids, and also they have also 4 of them, they have prepayment arrangement. Also for solar, the 11, they have load limiters, but 2 of them, they have prepayment arrangement. And the diesel and the natural gas mini-grids, all of them, they have prepayment metering arrangement. The hybrid mini-grids, 2 of them, they have prepayment arrangement, and the one has a credit metering arrangement. With that, I would like to pass on the presentation to my colleague, Mr. Katega. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sawe. Now, let's go on the slide whereby we present our findings on financing of mini-grids in Tanzania. Financing of mini-grids in Tanzania and grid extension during the year 2007 to /8 to 2013/14 involved resources in the tune of $255 million. The figure does not include funds from faith-based organizations and some of the development partners. Now, if you look into the pie chart, you'll find that 52% of the resources was raised from the government budgetary allocation. Next, 18% came from electricity levy, followed by 12% which came from SEDA contribution, followed by 7% which came from Norway government contribution, and then 7% came from predestination inspection fee, and lastly 4% came from interest on investment. So, if you seriously look into the pie chart, you see that 52% and 18%, all these show how much the Tanzania government commitment is to financing mini grids and sub-transmission of the grid. In total, this comes to 70%. So, the government of Tanzania is really committed to financing rural electrification and rural renewables in the country. The government of Tanzania, in collaboration with the World Bank, through the so-called Tanzania Energy Development and Access Projects program, came up with two very innovative ways to assist mini-grid development in the rural areas as well as sub-transmission. They came up with smart subsidies which are in the form of matching grants and performance grants. Also, as part of the innovation, they came up with the credit line facilities. Now, when it comes to matching grants, up to $1,000 is provided per project, up to $100,000 is provided per each project for feasibility studies, business plan development, and environmental impact assessments. A total of $3.1 million has been disbursed for 30 renewable energy projects with a total capacity of 94 megawatts from the year 2010 to 2014. And performance grants in the tune of $500 for each electricity connection in the rural areas is provided to the investors. A total of $5.3 million has been disbursed for 7 projects from 2010 to 2014. Also, a credit line facility in the tune of $23 million was established for long-term loans of up to 15 years through the local Tanzanian Investment Bank, which is disbursed via 7 local commercial banks. Now, the TaTEDO program ended in 2014, but from 2015 to 2019, the World Bank has come up with new financing for the so-called Renewable Energy and Rural Electrification Program. The World Bank support is in the tune of $200 million for grid extension and $75 million for mini-grid projects. Also, the government of Tanzania, in collaboration with the SEDA, DFID, have also come up with financing for additional activities. SEDA commitment to Rural Energy Fund is Swedish crowns 600 million during 2016 to 2019. The distribution is as follows. 500 million crowns is for grid extension, and the balance 100 million Swedish crowns is for mini-grids. In turn, DFID commitment is in the tune of British sterling 30 million for green mini-grids in the country, which will be supervised by SEDA on behalf of DFID. Now, for the DFID funds, these are to be disbursed during 2015 to 2019. Now, let us look on financing for completed projects under Small Power Projects Framework, or the so-called small power projects regulatory framework. We have Tanwat in Njombe, a biomass plant of 2.5 megawatts, grid connected. Financing came from Commonwealth Development Company, DFID, and World Bank. TPC from Moshi, a biomass plant of 17.5 megawatts, with 9 megawatts is exported to the grid. Financing came from Danida and the World Bank. Lumama Mawengi projects is 0.3 megawatt hydro, is off-grid. Financing came from Italian government, European Union, Intervita, World Bank via Rural Energy Agency. Mwenga Mufindi hydro plant of 4 megawatts is grid connected. Financing came from ASP EU, Rural Energy Agency, Rift Valley Energy Company, World Bank via Rural Energy Agency. Ngombeni, Mafia Island, biomass of 1.5 megawatts is off-grid. Financing came from DFID, World Bank via Rural Energy Agency. Andoya Haiko Mbinga Hydro, 1 megawatt off-grid. Financing came from World Bank via Rural Energy Agency. Tulila St. Agnes Chipole of Songea hydro plant of 7.5 megawatts off-grid. Financing came from World Bank via Rural Energy Agency. And then we have Yovi Hydro Kilosa hydro plant of 0.9 megawatts, grid connected. Finance came from Europe. And we have the Maguta Power Project Kilolo hydro plant of 2.5 megawatts, is grid connected. Financing came from World Bank via Rural Energy Agency. And we have Ikondo Njombe hydro plant of 0.4 grid connected, Italian government, European Union, and SEFA financing. Now, we have some projects which are under construction, which are on small power projects regulatory framework. Now, their financing is as follows. We have Ninga in Njombe, a hydro plant of 4 megawatts, is grid connected, expected soon. The sources of funding is coming from European Union. We have Garakuta Manyara, a hydro plant of 0.24, which we expect to be grid connected. On completion, financing is coming from the World Bank via Rural Energy Agency. We have East Africa Power Limited of Tukuyu, a hydro plant of 10 megawatts, which will be grid connected, and the sources of financing is coming from the World Bank via Rural Energy Agency. We have Mapembasi Njombe hydro project of 10 megawatts. It will be grid connected. Financing is from World Bank via Rural Energy Agency. We have Nkwilo Sumbawanga hydro plant of 2.9 megawatts to be off-grid. Financing is coming from the World Bank via Rural Energy Agency. We have Luswisi project in Ilejembeya, a hydro plant of 4.7. On completion will be grid connected, and financing is coming from World Bank via Rural Energy Agency. Now let's look at the experiences on mini-grids in relation to rural development, because we build mini-grids in the rural areas so that it can foster rural development. What we have found out is that establishing links between mini-grids and local development is key to long-term sustainability of the mini-grids. Let's look at one example of Lumama mini-grid project of 300 kilowatts using hydro, located in Ludewa district. And this project is run as a community-owned social enterprise. Initially, when it was started, it was run by 3 villages, but it has been extended to other 5 villages. And currently, it's a social enterprise for 8 villages. Lumama is a success story in the country. Now, the success factors are the following. First factor is development should be linked to productivity. Mini-grid development was coupled with efforts to promote productive activities in the local village, involving sunflower production, mechanical workshops, poultry farming, and links to financing institutions. The second is funding. We found out that the development of productive activities was funded by an Italian donor, ACRACCS. Also, cost-reflective tariffs were imposed in the project. Another one is locals have ownership in the social enterprise, thereby implying that whatever benefits accruing from the project, a fair portion remains within the village for development. Management structures is another factor. What we have found out is that well-established local management and accountability structures are in place in the village. Yeah, now when we develop the mini-grids, we face a lot of challenges and barriers, and these need to be resolved so that the mini-grid development process can go ahead successfully. Now, from our studies, we have come up with the following experiences. The first one is, the first barrier was inadequate policy on small power producers or small power projects, especially on renewables. To date, there is no policy specific geared to mini-grids. However, it is incorporated in the Electricity Act of 2008. Now, this process to resolve this policy on SPP was undertaken during 2003 to 2008, and the result is the Electricity Act of 2008. Another barrier was lack of regulatory framework for small power projects or small SPPs. Now, this was resolved through the Electricity Act, the Energy and Water Utilities Regulatory Authority Act, Rural Energy Act, and Small Power Producers Regulatory Framework of 2008. Now, this process was undertaken during 2001 to 2008. Now, the results are, we have standardized power purchase agreement and standardized power purchase tariffs, or popularly known as feed-in tariffs. This regulatory framework is key to the current successes in proliferating small power projects in the country. Yeah. Now, another barrier was lack of SPP tariffs for SPP projects. As I've said here, this was resolved by established tariff setting mechanism undertaken during 2008 to 2009. And in 2009, we came in with the technology neutral feed-in tariffs. Now, these tariffs had their own challenges. One of the challenges was lack of technology-specific feed-in tariffs. As my colleague said, the technology neutral feed-in tariffs were more geared to mini hydro and biomass projects. So there were some revisions to the tariff setting mechanism undertaken during 2009 to 2012, and thereby we came in with technology-specific feed-in tariffs. However, there were other challenges which emerged because of economies of scale in the technologies involved, and therefore the feed-in tariffs had to be revised through the tariff setting mechanism during 2012 to 2015, and then we came up with technology which is size-specific feed-in tariffs. Now, another barrier was high inflation in the country and Tanzanian shillings currency fluctuations. So revision of the tariff setting mechanism was employed during 2012 to 2015, and feed-in tariffs in US dollars came in. These were highly acceptable to the investors in small power projects in the rural areas. Another challenge or barrier was high taxes and duties on renewable equipment. These were resolved by tax exemption for solar and wind equipment. Now, from 2000, taxes and duties have been waived on solar PV and wind equipment. So these have really made things change drastically. Another barrier was lack of financing for private small power producers. What was done was established smart subsidies. This was done during 2008 to 2014, whereby matching and performance grants for investors in the rural areas were available. Another one was lack of credit line facilities. This was resolved by established credit and loan guarantee facility via Tanzania Investment Bank, which is disbursed by local commercial banks. This was undertaken during 2008 to 2014. Commercial loans for small power producers projects are now available in the country. Another barrier was inadequate local capacity to develop, operate and maintain small power projects. Now, this was resolved by Rural Energy Agency, whereby it established a fund for capacity building, which was done during 2010 to 2015. They came up with a toolkit and training of local investors and commercial institutions involved in small power projects financing incentives. Another barrier, I'm going to say the last, but there are others, but poverty of potential customers in the rural areas was a big challenge. As you know, rural population has not the same opportunities as those in the townships. So this barrier was resolved by connection costs or fees being waived for specific periods for new rural energy projects, whether grid extension or mini grids. The duration was done during 2010 to 2012. The result is that customers pay only value-added tax or VAT, which is about 18% of connection fees or connection costs. Actually, this approach has been very much welcomed by the rural people, and it has changed the connection rates in the country. Now, when electricity reaches the rural areas, whether it's mini-grid or grid extension, the excitement is often very high, as you can see in the picture. So, now let's turn as to what are the lessons learned on mini-grids in Tanzania. The key lessons. The first one is related to technology. We have found out that technology-specific feed-in tariffs are more attractive to mini-grid investors than technology-neutral feed-in tariffs. The second is, owing to falling prices over time, feed-in tariffs for solar and wind projects can best be determined by competitive bidding. Third, the inability of the distribution network, I'm talking of the main distribution network operator, that is TANESCO, to honor its financial obligations affects the viability of grid-connected private small power producers, namely Mwenga, Tanwat, Aheko. Another lesson was something to do with efficient operation management and the reflective cost tariffs. Irrespective of the ownership approach adopted by the mini-grid, the efficient operation and management of mini-grids coupled with cost-reflective tariffs is key to long-term sustainability. Another lesson is that financing of mini-grids should be a joint effort of governments, development partners, the private sector, faith-based organizations, and NGOs. Now, we have seen what has happened in Tanzania, but what more is needed so as the successes can be accelerated? So, from our study, the following can be advised. First, a dynamic small power producers regulatory framework that evolves over time and responds to the needs of all actors, including investors, distribution network operators, retailers, and end-use customers, is key. The second, you need to have effective monitoring and evaluation of mini-grid financing, especially with matching grants, so as to make sure that the resources is optimally used. Third, you need to expand innovative metering and revenue collection systems in the country. For example, through use of pay-as-you-go systems, which is being currently practiced by many institutions, many mini-grids in the country, especially the private sector. And this has been very successful. Now, what we can also come up with the suggestions if we want to bring mini-grids to scale. These are our observations which can be replicated in other parts of sub-Saharan Africa and other countries interested in mini-grids. The first one is something to do with resources. Increasing internal and external resources mobilization for mini-grids development is really important. Second is capacity building. You need to undertake large-scale capacity building of mini-grid stakeholders in management, business, and technical aspects. Third, you need to undertake and adopt an integrated approach to mini-grid planning that incorporates other development initiatives and promotes community participation. The other one, improving coordination in site selection, feasibility studies, regulatory clearances, and project prioritization for implementation is very, very important. Another one is incentivizing local manufacturing of some of the basic electrification equipment within the country is highly advised. Another one, and finally, mini-grid development should be coordinated with rural development activities so as to stimulate and sustain demand in the rural areas. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been our experience and lessons we have learned, and thank you so much for your attention. I take you back to lead Udan. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much for the presentations. And we did receive quite a few questions from the audience, so we'll move right along to the question and answer session at this point. Just a reminder to our attendees, if you have any questions for the panelists today, you can submit those through the question pane. Any questions that we might not have time to get to, we can always come back and email those to the panelists following the webinar as well. So I'll start. I'll go back to the earlier questions that we received, and we can we'll start with those and work our way through. Some of these may have been answered throughout the presentation, but the first one we received here is they're asking, what is the difference between conventional grids and mini grids, and can you explain about the granular approach? So maybe just a little quick overview on what the, we did have another question as well asking what the size of the mini grids your project was looking at specifically. So maybe a quick overview on the difference between the conventional grid and a mini grid, and then what sort of mini grids you're talking about in Tanzania. Is there a certain distinction in size that qualifies it as a mini grid?
Okay, so
go ahead. Let's start with Lily.
yeah, so I just was going to provide the answer to what the granular approach is about. So in the introductory comment, I made mention of the fact that there's a lot of information out there about mini grids, which is really on a very high level, which identifies some of the barriers, as there's no financing for this sector. This sector is not well understood. We do not understand what policy and regulatory frameworks are going to work for this sector. So those are presented as very high level or very general indications of the challenges with mini-grid implementation. And when we talk about a granular approach, we are talking about an approach brings these experiences to the project level, which goes to specific communities with mini-grids and tries to understand exactly how these challenges are being experienced in a very typical community context. Because we realize that sometimes the generalizations are useful as general pointers, but do not provide us with the information we need to make actual market decisions, to make actual decisions as to whether we want to go with this technology or the other. It doesn't just give us the knowledge that we need practically about what people are experiencing with mini-grid implementation on the ground.
Great, thank you, Lily. Anastome or Katiago, do you have any insight onto what qualifies for a mini-grid? What size system would that be?
Yeah.
Any more details on?
Thank you. When we talk of conventional grid or the main grid, we are talking about the grid which is connected to large power plants and through high transmission voltages starting from 66 kV, 132 kV, 220 kV and upwards. Now for mini grids, these are small size grids whereby transmission and distribution voltage is medium voltage. In Tanzania it is 33 and 11 kV. Now regarding the size, I turn the question to my colleague.
Okay, thank you very much. The mini grids, the sizes we are referring to, there are two types of mini grid sizes, the ones which are benefiting from SPP regulatory framework. The size ranges from 100 kilowatts to below 10 megawatts. But also you can have lower than 100 kilowatts mini grid sizes, which can generate electricity but sell it to customers on retail basis.
Thank you.
Great, thanks everybody. And a couple questions, a couple of attendees want to know if the report is available to the public, or the findings of the work, if there's any information out there that they can access.
Well, I think we are still working on the report to finalize it, but once it is finalized, I think it will be definitely available to the public.
Great. And what are the most common financing options that a community can take advantage of in Tanzania to cover the required investment to implement a mini-grid?
The financing options. The first one is if the financier has enough resources, he can go it alone, finance the project, and then sell electricity to the DNO or directly to the villagers. However, experience shows that this is very difficult owing to the local private investors in the country. They don't have enough resources to do so. So the options are grant financing, which is often available from Rural Energy Agency, development partners, NGOs, etc. The second is to take a loan through the innovative financing arrangements in Tanzania, provided the investor has prepared a bankable business plan and submitted to the commercial banks through the Rural Energy Agency. He can obtain financing. Now, the last option is the first option I said, to use equity or own resources. Now, those are the financial sources we have come up into the country. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Move along to the next question now. A couple people were wondering if you could provide a further explanation of the load limiter metering payment approach.
Thank you. A load limiter is a fuse which is used instead of the meter. The load limiter just allows a certain amount of current to get into the consumer's premises. If the consumer has come up with a load that cannot be supported by the fuse, electricity goes out, and therefore he has to reduce the components he is using in the in the household or in the business, and then electricity comes back. So this type is sometimes called flat rate metering and payment system. This system is inefficient when it comes to looking at demand side management aspects. The consumer has no incentive to reduce his load as long as the load limiter allows the electricity. This is maybe the shortcoming of the load limiter. Thank you.
Great, thanks again. Move along now to the next question. It's asking if the ultimate objective for all Tanzanian mini-grids is to be connected to the main grid, or are long-term, independent, commercially viable mini-grids also a possible endpoint?
The main objective of mini-grids is to provide electricity in those areas where the grid has not reached there, and it will take a very long time to reach there. As long as it is cost reflective, or it is a better option than grid extension, this objective is met. Now, when you have a mini-grid, the more time then the demand grows, the capacity is increased, and when comes a time when the demand is large enough, this is connected to the grid. This is the common practice in the country. But you can develop small projects and establish your own mini-grid and still sell to the main grid or to the conventional grid. So it's just one option of electrifying the country. Thank you.
Great. And the next question goes back a little bit. It is asking, what are the main considerations that the Energy and Water Utilities Regulatory Authority have when calculating the tariffs for mini-grid projects?
The regulatory authority, when it comes to calculating the tariffs for mini-grids, is to come up with tariffs which are fair to the producers and to the consumers, be it distribution network operator or retail customers. That's the basic objective of the tariff setting mechanism undertaken by the regulator. So the tariffs, the feed-in tariffs are computed based on costs, avoided costs of the distribution network operator, whether it is grid connected or isolated or mini-grid. That's why during the presentation, Mr. Sawe talked of feed-in tariffs for the main grid and feed-in tariffs for the mini-grids. Now, if it is conventional grid, then it's avoided cost in the conventional grid. If it is in the mini-grid, it's the avoided cost of the mini-grid distribution network operator. Now, in the case where the small power producer is going to generate electricity, distribute it, and sell it directly to the customers, what normally is done is that he provides the cost of service report to the regulator. The regulator looks at the costs and the tariff which has been applied, and normally there is a public hearing whereby the consumers are invited and whoever is investing presents his application. Following the application being reviewed by customers, the government, and the regulator finally approves the tariffs which he feels these are fair to the customers as well as the generator. This is the approach. Thank you.
Great, excellent. We have a couple questions on the ownership model and building the community capacity. What they're asking is they're wondering more about the local ownership and management. What factors are included in your vision for improved integrated planning, and who, if anyone, from the communities are involved in the design and governance of the system, and how does the ownership type influence the importance placed on community consultation? So I'll repeat some of that. They're wondering more about the local ownership and management. What factors are included in your vision for improved integrated planning, and who, if anyone, from the communities are involved in the design and governance of the systems?
Okay, thank you very much. And as we said earlier, the participation of the local community from the very beginning of the mini-grid planning is very crucial for the sustainability of the mini-grid services, and also for the realizing different benefits from the mini-grids development. And the involvement of the community starts from involving also the local authority, local government, local village leaders, and also involving different groups at the very beginning to try to identify the needs, the priorities, the linkages between the mini-grids development and also the development at the local level. And this could take different forms depending on the type of the mini-grid and also the community itself. But the most important really is ensuring that the local community is also well informed on the development of the mini-grid, but also well informed about the benefits from the mini-grids that will be developed, and also they are well informed and well involved on the management of the mini-grids. And this can take different forms, including maybe formation or at the local level of the potential users of the services, associations, having them to participate maybe in the management or having shares within from the mini-grids itself, and also training them to be able to operate the mini-grids, maintenance, manage the mini-grids at different levels. So I think the involvement of the community can take different forms depending on community to community which is involved in the mini-grid development. As we said, we gave an example of the Lumama mini-grid, which from the very beginning it was tailored to ensure that the community is empowered through proper training of management, proper training of operating the system and maintenance of the system, and also management of the systems businesses arising from the mini-grids. They were well trained, well informed, well involved, and so they feel they own, they are part of it. And even the benefits that are being realized from the mini-grids, they provide development or benefit the villagers. Thank you.
I can add a few things also. During planning, in the case of Lumama, villagers provided free land whereby you're going to put up a plant, and also for the way you live, all the lines are going to cross the villages, thereby reducing significantly the costs. And also the villagers have made a number of bylaws which are geared to protecting the water sources, whereby if somebody or a village is involved in bush fires or unproductive agricultural systems like cultivating along the river valleys and thereby contributing silt to the mini hydro. Now, if it comes to a point that they know that a certain village has not stuck to the bylaws, there are ways to deal with them. And during the dry season, when the flows are very low, the villagers which do not follow the bylaws are normally not given electricity as a lesson. So these are some of the examples of community development in the planning, in the operation and maintenance of the system. Thereby, they may make sure that the sustainability of the mini grid is there. Thank you.
Great, and thank you both again. One of the questions notes that you mentioned a light-handed approach that has been introduced in the Electricity Act of 2008. Can you elaborate a bit more on what you mean by light-handed?
The Electricity Act talks of the light-handed approach. Now, this has been translated into the small power projects or small power producers regulatory mechanism or framework, whereby we have standardized power purchase agreement and standardized power purchase tariffs. By having standardized power purchase agreements, the regulator has avoided one thing. If there is an agreement between the small power producer and the distribution network operator, they sign the standardized power purchase agreement and they send it to the regulator. What the regulator looks at is whether there are no shortcuts done to avoid the regulatory framework. As long as the regulatory framework has been followed, the regulator just allows the project to go ahead. Now, and for the standardized power purchase tariffs, it's the same. It is standard. You don't negotiate the tariff. Now, this is what is called light-handed approach. That is, instead of each project being negotiated, and that would consume a lot of time, the regulator has not allowed that to happen. That's why the regulator has come up with the standardized power purchase agreement and standardized power purchase tariff. This is part of what is involved in the light-handed regulatory approach. Thank you.
Okay. Maybe in summary also, the light-handed regulation normally minimize the amount of information that is required by the potential development of the mini grid, and you also minimize the number of separate regulatory requirements and the decisions that they are made. And as my colleagues say, use standardized documents and make use of documents that they are used also by different agencies, and they also minimize the discretional judgment and the time required for making decisions. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And one of our attendees is noting that they're currently evaluating villages in Tanzania in order to deploy privately owned mini-grids. Suitable villages for large mini-grids seem to be very rare. Where, in your opinion, are villages in Tanzania suitable for mini-grids? Is there, what characteristics do you look for?
During the presentation, my colleagues talked of the southern parts of the country and the western parts of the country where the national grid has not reached there. There we have large towns and large villages which can benefit from large mini-grids.
And also to add up, I think it will depend also on the size of the mini-grid that one wants to develop, because the cost effectiveness, the load profile that would identify, but also it's important also to note that there are also villages, but also there are rural growth centers where you find a lot more than 5,000 people, 10,000 people who are indifferent, and there are a lot of business activities ongoing. So those have been identified also under the Rural Energy Agency prospectus as potential areas where if a grid is not expected to be there for sometimes, then those are potential areas for mini grid development in the country. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. And it sounds like a lot of the mini-grids in Tanzania are dependent upon public finance. Is this an ongoing requirement or just support to set up? And are there any commercially viable models without public funding for operation, maintenance, and reinvestment?
Well, as I said, most of the investors, especially the local investors, don't have enough resources to fund the projects on themselves. That's why they depend on the government. The other reason is that rural electrification using renewables is very expensive. And also, if all the costs are to be tied in, the tariffs tend to be very high. Now, to assist the rural areas, the government has come up with an innovative financing arrangement whereby subsidies are provided so as to reduce the costs and thereby make it possible for many rural projects to come up and villagers in the rural areas to benefit from electrification so that they can also see their own rural development.
Great, thank you. And are private owner and operators of isolated mini-grids allowed to charge market rate fees to energy users?
Can you come again?
Are private owners and operators of isolated mini-grids allowed to charge market rate fees to energy users?
Well, we gave a good example of Ulumama, where the tariffs are cost reflective. They are market rates, and the tariffs that they are prepared by small power producer developers, they have to prepare the tariff, and then they are submitted to regulatory authority for approval of retail sales. So the tariffs can be definitely determined based on market rates and the cost reflective of your services.
And we have time for just a couple more questions. How long do you ensure the ownership, and what happens when the central grid arrives?
Now, for the case of signed small power purchase agreements, these normally are from 15 to 25 years. Now, if the grid comes to the area, there are a number of options. One option is the small power producer can use his plant to sell electricity to the grid DNO. Alternatively, he can remain as a DNO and producer of electricity, whereby he can be a DNO for that area, which means that when the grid comes and the load in the village is bigger than what is producing, he will be importing electricity from the grid and retailing it to the electricity end users. Now, what happens if he decides not to be selling electricity to the customers or the retail services and decides to sell electricity to the grid? The standardized power purchase tariff will prevail, and the tariff he was charging will have to stop. And if he's going to continue generating and selling electricity and receiving electricity from the grid, then standardized power purchase tariffs will not continue, but the regulator will be coming up with tariffs which the owner of the plant will charge. In the case of Mwenga in Mufindi, they have their own mini hydro of 4 megawatts, and they are selling electricity to 18 villages. At the same time, 95% of their generation is sold to the national grid. So he's comfortable and is continuing. So this is one example. So it is quite possible that the grid can come, and there are a number of options for the investor to decide. Thank you.
All right, and thank you again. We are running out of time, so we'll have to end the question and answer session here. Any questions that were left over that we didn't get a chance to get to, I do apologize, but we can go ahead and email those to the panelists and try to get responses to those as soon as possible for you. So we do have a quick evaluation for the audience. We'll display the first number, first question, and this attendee survey will just help us evaluate and improve for our next webinar. So that first question for you is: the webinar content provided me with useful information and insight? And please just go ahead and respond directly in the window there. Thank you. And the next question: the webinar's presenters were effective? And then the third question: overall, the webinar met my expectations? And do you anticipate using the information presented in this webinar directly in your work and or organization? And then the last question that we have for you: do you anticipate applying the information presented to develop or revise policies or programs in your country of focus? Great. Thank you very much for answering our survey. We do appreciate it. And on behalf of the Clean Energy Solutions Center, I'd like to once again thank our expert panelists for taking the time to join us today and for answering, giving the presentations and answering some of our questions. We do appreciate it. And also to the attendees, we very much value your time and thank you for joining us. As a reminder, I would like to invite our attendees to check the Solutions Center website if you'd like to view the slides and listen to a recording of today's presentations, as well as any previously held webinars. Additionally, you will find information on other upcoming webinars and other training events. And just a reminder, we're now posting webinar recordings to the Clean Energy Solutions Center YouTube channel, where you'll find several of our other webinar recordings as well as videos on clean energy topics. Please allow about 1 week for the audio recording to be posted. We also invite you to inform your colleagues and those in your networks about the Solutions Center resources and services, including the no-cost Ask an Expert policy support that's available. With that, I hope everyone has a great rest of your day, and we hope to see you again at future Clean Energy Solutions Center events. This concludes our webinar.